What do you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
XTCLimeWhite.com.
What do you call that noise?
Hello there, I'm Mark Fisher, and this is What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast. Today, we're continuing the discussion from 2 episodes ago about references in XTC songs that might need some explanation for those living further afield. In the first Oranges and Ladybirds episode, we talked a lot about the influence of British nursery rhymes on XTC songs. Peter Mills remembered the influence of school.
The playground is like the big square world.
I talked about the nursery rhyme, Oranges and Lemons. When you hear orange and lemon, raincoats roll and tumble, you're programmed to hear oranges and lemons say the bells of St. Clements. That's the thing that sort of goes into your head, and then Andy takes it off to raincoats and roll and tumble. Belinda Blanchard talked about the gruesomeness of many nursery rhymes.
To hear the original reasoning and the original source then, makes you realise just how horrific it all was.
From the United States, Sandy Leffew talked about her fascination with British culture.
I think it all started probably with the first British invasion. And we got plenty of Anglophiles here in this country to enjoy their music.
And that is a sentiment echoed by Amy Parkerson.
For me, Brits are just exotic anyway.
Then, of course, we had the wonderful Sarah Palmer from Fascine giving us her renditions of nursery rhymes, including Oranges and Lemons.
Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clements. You owe me 5 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey. When I grow rich, say the bells of Shoreditch. And when will that be, said the bells of Shepney. Oh, I do not know, says the great Belinda. Here comes the candle to light you to bed. Here comes the chopper to chop off your head.
Thanks again to Sarah for that. Also in that episode, Donna Rees provided our monthly recommendation of the perfect drink to go with the perfect song. So it seems only right that she should give us another perfect pairing this time.
My name's Donna Reese, and I'm going to suggest to go with the song Grass, a bottle of really cheap cider and 2 straws.
Thank you, Donna. I think the straw is essential for that particular combination. A quick thank you also to the generous supporters on Patreon who make this podcast possible. They include Pink Things, Humble Daisies, and Knights in Shining Karma. And the Knights in Shining Karma will get a name check at the end of this episode. If you'd like to keep the podcast free of ads and packed with XTC goodness, please head to patreon.com/Mark Fisher. We got lots of interesting feedback from the first episode. For example, when I was talking about the phrase Jack and Jillian years ago, which is from We're All Light, and that was a reference to the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill, which sounds a little bit like this.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after.
Thank you, Lotte Fisher. That prompted me to give a list of uses of the name Jack, which included Jack in the Box and Jack O'Lantern. Mark Thomas got in touch to add to that list, pointing out that not only does the phrase give us lumberjack, but also lumberjill, a term new to me. And that led me to finding out about the Women's Timber Corps, part of the UK war effort involving thousands of lumberjills working in the UK's forests. Then James Dignan said he thought, and I'm quoting, the biggest nursery rhyme influence was on Love on a Farm Boy's Wages. And he said the whole chorus is based on a nursery rhyme, and he reckoned it went right back to early songs like Scissor Man, which is another song we mentioned in the last episode in relation to Struvel Peter. James is absolutely right. If you think about the form of shilling for the fellow who brings the sheep in, shilling for the fellow who milks the herd, it's a very similar pattern to one for my master, one for my dame, in Bar Bar Black Sheep. So James also talked about a nursery rhyme that I didn't know, which goes, I've got sixpence, a jolly, jolly sixpence, tuppence to spend and tuppence to lend and tuppence to take home for my wife. And when I looked into that one, pretty much the first result to come up on Google was from Wiltshire Council and a page about Wiltshire community history. It gives the words to a folk song that it calls Jolly Shilling, which it says comes from Oxfordshire, although it was popular almost everywhere. And it includes several verses before the one that James quoted about the sixpence. And the first verse brings us even closer to Love on a Farm Boy's Wages. It goes like this. I have a jolly shilling, a lovely jolly shilling. I love my jolly shilling as I do love my life. I've a penny for to spend, another for to lend, and a jolly, jolly tenpence to carry home to my wife. And as the song, it's very funny, as the song goes on, the amount of money involved gets lower. So by the last line, he has nothing to carry home to my own dearest wife. And then finally, Simon Slatehome recalled hearing Andy Partridge in a 1989 interview with Johnny Walker saying that they called the album Oranges and Lemons precisely because of that timeless, eternal nursery rhyme quality. He said Andy was hoping some of his songs might pass into the common consciousness like Yellow Submarine had, divorced from its origins as a Beatles song and turning up on a kids' TV show as part of a fun thing about the colour yellow and persist in some form down the ages. Simon also drew my attention to the passage in Neville Farmer's Song Stories book that says Oranges and Lemons had a provisional title, Songs of Sixpence. Now, Sing a Song of Sixpence is a nursery rhyme that could go back to the time of Henry VIII. People don't really know, but there's a theory that it could go right back to Henry VIII, who is a 16th century candidate for being the king in his counting house.
Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? The king is in his counting house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlour, eating bread and honey. The maid was in the garden, hanging out the clothes, when down came a blackbird and pecked off her nose.
Thank you, Lotte Fisher, for that. In Song Stories, Andy says, I like nursery rhymes, but because the album was coming out so shiny and fluorescent and so sleek and fast, the title Oranges and Lemons seemed about right. In LA, they are the colours you see everywhere. This bold colour comes off the music and it fitted the criteria of a nursery rhyme title. So let's continue with the discussion between me, Belinda Blanchard, Peter Mills, Sandy Leffew and Amy Parkerson.
What do you call that noise?
Belinda, I think it's your turn to talk. Your turn to tell us everything about London. London appears quite a lot in for a band that don't come from London. London does appear quite a lot in XTC songs, does it not?
Yes.
Good. This is the shortest section of the program. We're now going to move on.
I think it's an example of exhibiting a love-hate relationship.
Do you think? Yeah.
In my limited experience, the further away from London you live, the more they hate us. My cousins in Wales hate us. I mean, they wouldn't even cross the bridge into England if they could possibly help it. So, and I'm speaking in humongous generalizations here. There is a very good reason to feel a bit annoyed about London in that we get most of the news, we get most of the money, but there are 8.5 million more people living here, but there's a hell of a lot more people that don't, but we get all the press. So when anyone goes abroad who comes from the UK, especially America, they'll say, oh, what part do you live in London? You know, as if that's if you don't come from London, don't bother talking to me because we're not interested. So even if you live sort of 100 miles away, you can afford to say near London, because 100 miles away from Dallas is still near Dallas as far as anyone else is concerned. So it's the same here. I mean, I'm not speaking for XTC. I daren't. I would merely suggest that there is a love-hate relationship, and it does tend to come across, and I'm not going to give you a million examples because right now my head has got beer in it and I can't think of any.
Well, you can give us one example because of where you live. You live in Peckham, and the phrase Peckham Rose is used in River of Orchids, and that's not something that anybody, I don't think, anybody anywhere in the UK would understand.
I did a bit of research on the Peckham Rose. Now, I live in Peckham, and I'd never heard of the rose before, so or Peckham Rose, and when I just assume he made it up. My interpretation of it is that Peckham is part of the southeast London, close to the centre of London, so it's a very heavily built up area. And although people don't realise it, when they think of Peckham, they think, it's just people and buildings. Well, there's an awful lot of green surrounding here. Well, the idea that Peckham might get so green if you got rid of cars that roses could appear. I think that there's that nice idea that our own named flora and fauna could appear because there's no cars or anything. It is quite rather lovely. So I like to think that that's what he meant, but no. Todd did an interview with him in 2008 where he mentioned about the Peckham Rose, and apparently it came from a Svankmajer short film, and he's talking about Peckham Rose matchsticks. There were Peckham Rose matchsticks, and actually I saw a box of them for sale from a rare, some odd weird company online. So that's where it came from. So there's also a lot of references to matches, but the Peckham Rose was really, it touched me. So I became Peckham Rose in a few things. In fact, I was thinking of changing my name to Peckham Rose in Facebook, but you can't do that. So it meant quite a lot to me because my grandmum's rose, so that's why.
I didn't know that about the Peckham Rose or the Jan Svankmajer film. I think that's brilliant. I'd just taken it like you, Belinda, to mean, like another England, the transformation that might be possible. To a sort of an inner city place if we just went about things differently.
Yeah.
But Svankmajer's films were he did a famous adaptation of Alice in Wonderland. So he did a lot of that stuff we're talking about, taking well-known stories and children's stories and sort of bringing the creepiness out a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
So however much we try to move away from nursery rhymes, we keep on getting pulled back.
Well, it's the motherlode. I'm beginning to think it's the motherlode. The Partridgean motherlode.
Any more questions from Amy and Sandy there?
Yeah, go for it. See what we got.
I think I know what Piccadilly Circus is. I just wanted to say that one of my very favorite Andy lyrics is I heard the dandelions roar in Piccadilly Circus. It's just so clever and brilliant.
Well, that's another example of the idea of, Piccadilly Circus, like hugely, it's a fake area, there is nothing natural there at all. So the idea of everything being green again, and dandelions being there, the fact is that an eighth of a mile away from Piccadilly Circus is a little square called Golden Square. You will find dandelions there, but let's not ruin the image.
If you know exactly where to look.
Yeah.
Well, actually, as we're talking about nature, maybe that was a good and rather clumsy segue into Harvest Festival, and Peter has lots of thoughts about Harvest Festival.
In a way, there are kind of two. If we're thinking about historically, there are two sorts of ways of thinking about Harvest Festival. There's the one which gets specifically sort of referenced in the song, which is a school one. I'm thinking it's a school, and in fact, it's a bit weird actually. The first sounds that you hear on Harvest Festival on Apple Venus Volume 1, to me, are some of the most evocative on any XTC record. The chairs scraping and the shuffling of the feet. And I'm just thinking straight away, they had me at the scraping of the chairs. I'm absolutely there. And I don't know whose idea that was, but it was absolutely inspired because straight away this place. And when I was a kid, the Harvest Festival was precisely that thing, tins of peaches that you'd take up to the front, and it was sort of distribution of groceries, I suppose, food goods that would be then given to kind of the deserving and the needy. But it had its sort of roots in a specific ceremony which was concocted by the Church of England in the 19th century. But before that, of course, which culture, which society has not given thanks when the harvest is in? You could look at any culture, anywhere, anytime, as far back as you want to go. Check the cave paintings. There'll be like celebrations of, the harvest coming in. So it's a very human thing to do, thank God, we've got food to last the winter.
Thank not God.
But indeed. But the Harvest Festival as a thing, which, is the school one that is evoked by the track. Actually, it's kind of the first half, isn't it? I'll come on to that in a minute. Was started in, I think it was 1843, by a very interesting churchman, the Reverend Robert Stephen Hawker. Now, I don't know if you have any listeners in Cornwall, Mark. I'm sure you do.
Global reach, Peter.
Global reach, indeed. Okay. Well, this is a shout out to all the people of Cornwall. It's much further west, of course, than Wiltshire and Swindon.
Oh, they hate Londoners even
do
more.
They? Yeah, I suppose they would, wouldn't they, being that much further away? Robert Stephen Hawker. And he was a very interesting man. He was a cleric. He was the vicar of Morwenstow, which is North Cornwall, actually. And he was, in his own little way, I suppose, he was quite a rebellious figure and introduced lots of sort of Thanksgiving hymns, actually, into the Church of England's repertoire, if we can call it that. So things like All Things Bright and Beautiful, and we plough the fields and scatter. Drawing, it was quite green, I suppose you could call him, quite a sort of a green cleric, and was very sort of in tune with the rhythm of the seasons, and that's something we get, isn't it, from XTC? There's a sense of life outdoors, I always think. Obviously on Skylarking, but plenty of other places too. So we get, the season cycle. And so, the Harvest Festival obviously is to do with the end of summer and the sort of the onset of autumn and winter. And anyway, Robert Hawker started the modern idea of the Harvest Festival, sort of dressed the church in sort of flowers and put bread and, all the sort of the good things, if I can use that phrase, that had been gathered in, and started this service, which was a kind of thanksgiving, really, for, the bounty of the earth and the sea, and obviously Morwenstow is right by the sea. Well, I should just say also as well, he had a hut. So you can go to Hawker's Hut, which is now a National Trust property. Well, you can't go anywhere at the moment, actually, in the UK. But when we can, you can go and visit Hawker's Hut, which is high on a cliff outside Morwenstow. And he used to sit there and smoke his pipe and ruminate and, write his sermons and whatever. And supposedly it was sitting in Hawker's Hut that he came up with this idea for the Harvest Festival, a sort of Thanksgiving festival for the bounty of the sea and of the earth. And it kind of caught on because there was a spectacle, like the children would bring stuff in. It wouldn't be tin goods, obviously, then it'd be sort of stuff that people had actually made and grown. And there was a repertoire that went with it, so it was quite portable. So there was this, visually appealing thing, got the kids of the parish involved. There was this bunch of songs that went with it, and it went viral in the Victorian Church of England. But then by the time, I guess the post-war generation were growing up, it had become somewhat secularized, well, in fact, fairly secularized, and was in school, actually. It was something that would happen in school, which brings us back to the song. And that's why you've got that sound at the beginning and, the wonky school piano that everybody remembers. And also that sort of exchange of looks between the narrator and, the girl who's gone up to put a tin of peaches, on the table at the front. But then an interesting thing happens, doesn't it, in the song? The kind of, what shall we say, the time of ripeness that is being celebrated through, the provision of goods gets translated into a personal one, doesn't it? And is sort of that exchange moment that they have that seems to last for years and years and years. And then it goes off into a more personal thing with the invitation to the wedding, which first time I heard it, I thought, oh, that's taken an unusual twist now. But it really links in with that whole sort of, I'm trying to resist the phrase "circle of life" here. I'm trying to think of another way of saying it. But that sort of exchange, that the planting, the rising, the harvesting, the delivery, and then it starts all over again. The season cycle.
Well, then Andy goes on to talk in his lyrics. He says, "But the exams and crops all failed."
Yeah, brilliant.
She obviously goes on to the next form of school or level or something. And that's kind of a sad letdown in that song. I sort of caught that.
It's a lovely line, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
In that sense of the divergent pathways as well.
Right.
They just have that moment of togetherness, which seems to endure, but also the reality is this other thing.
Right. And he always kind of seems to paint himself as, somebody who got left behind, or I don't know, somebody who's of a certain group or class that just doesn't go on.
Yeah, but that's why for so many of us, we loved it, because we associated totally with it. And I totally agree with you, Peter, the beginning, when you hear those chairs and the footsteps. I am that sad little 10-year-old. I had to go to a boarding school for delicate children. It was the worst, because we'd come back from the school holidays, and in my case and a few other kids' cases, the only tins we brought were the ones that my mum sort of found at the back of the larder, mind you, with a due-by date close to, or whenever. Eat by last week. Oh, that'll do, love, give them that. You know what I mean? And you were so embarrassed. That is just such a beautiful song. That makes me weep for all the same reasons.
Yeah, it is so beautiful. It really gets me every time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And just that sense of the participation in a ritual, which has been going on for years and years and years and years. And now it's your turn.
I'm shocked, Peter, though, to realise that the ritual isn't actually that old. When I was doing it in the 1970s, it was only 100 and whatever, 20 years old or something.
Yeah, true. But as I say, that was just, they just kind of co-opted what, as I say, the human impulse is anyway, to be grateful that everything's in and we're going to be all right.
And then in American terms, we're kind of talking about Thanksgiving, but it's not the same. There's no meal involved. It's just a ritual. I only associate it with school. Maybe Church of England did things, but it's a school thing that I associate it with. Is it, Amy? Is it something that you do you just know what a harvest festival is, or is it exotic in the way that we're talking about?
It's exotic in the way you're talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly have Thanksgiving, but that sounds like it's different than what you're referencing.
What do you call that noise?
Shall I talk about new towns?
Yeah.
I thought Newtowns had a sort of context which well, you can tell me whether it has a similarity in the United States as well, but it's to do with the specific geography and history of the United Kingdom, particularly after the war. A lot of big cities such as London and Liverpool and Glasgow had been bombed, and Coventry, for example, a huge example of cities that have been bombed and destroyed in the war, coupled with a lot of dense inner city housing, which was a very low standard. These were slums which really needed to be knocked down. And the solution to this was to build new towns. And new towns were typically built on the periphery of a city, or sometimes maybe out in the country as a little island on its own, or in some, there'd be some village that would suddenly become a major conurbation. And there were big waves of these new towns that were built in the 1940s and the 1960s. If we come to XTC, the Pen Hill estate was built on farmland to house the overspill from London, and work began there in 1952, and the estate was still being built when Andy's family moved there. So by 1965, there were more than 2,000 houses in Pen Hill. So we're talking about primarily residential areas, and this can cause problems because although many people aspired to moving in new towns because they'd lived in such grotty, damp and decaying housing in the inner cities, and here was the opportunity of fresh air and views and maybe the opportunity to get closer to the countryside and so on. There was also the downside, which is that they were typically not connected with places of work, maybe not designed very well so that you could easily get to the shops, and so it sort of challenged communities and so on. And so there are also problems. And so when we get Newtown Animal, is in terms of lyrics is not a very long song, but when we get Andy Partridge talking about a Newtown animal in a furnished cage, it's this idea of sort of comfort. You've got this, it's furnished, but it's also a cage, so you feel trapped by it. And I think Andy was thinking of all Newtowns everywhere when he thought of that. If we stick on the urban theme, Belinda is a keen motorcyclist and might be able to tell us one or two things about roundabouts.
I love roundabouts. The reason I love roundabouts is because A, they don't waste electricity like traffic lights do. B, when you approach a roundabout, if there's no one coming, you can continue on your way. Whereas at a traffic light, legally, you should stay at the red until it turns green, even if there's no one there. So I can't think of there is no more to it than that. That's a perfect reason why there should be roundabouts. Now, the first modern version of a roundabout was opened in 1899 in Germany. And in fact, there were roundabouts in America, in San Jose, before they were introduced to the UK, unbelievably. And the first one in the UK was in Letchworth Garden City. Now, I thought that Letchworth was a new town, but I think I'm wrong. Anyway, so that's why I like roundabouts. Now, we're used to them in this country, and they do work. You give way to the traffic from your right, or if you're in America, on your left, and you enter the roundabout when it's free to do so, get to the left, or in America, the right-hand side, to exit the roundabout. Nothing could be simpler. But the rise of the amount of cyclists, certainly in London, has meant that some very busy roundabouts have been reimagined to be more friendlier to cyclists, because they can be a bit dangerous. The very busy ones can be dangerous for cyclists. In America, I haven't been to all of America. I've been to quite a bit of it. They don't like roundabouts. They don't understand the theory of them. Even there are some. I've been around a few in the States and in Canada. But on the whole, Americans aren't keen on the idea. What the Americans do better is they have a 4-way stoplight or a 3-way stoplight, and it's always flashing on or off. So you just turn up to it, and like a roundabout, you take your turn. But of course, that doesn't always work. But a roundabout is egalitarian. It's no matter if you're really in, unless you're a police car with your lights flashing, or ambulance, or the other one, ambulance, fire engine, that's it. You have got the right of way when there is nothing coming from the right, or in America, the left. The architect John McLaren actually designed one of the first American roundabouts for both autos and streetcars, trams, as I said, in San Jose. And the first British circular junction, also known as Circular Junction, was built in Letchworth Garden City in 1909. So the one in Swindon that is the 5-way one, I don't think I've actually, I don't know if I've done it. I'm sure it would be the sort of thing I've done I would remember if I'd done on a motorcycle, but I don't think I have. What I don't like about that one is that it would be quite dangerous for cyclists and two powered two-wheelers, motorcyclists and mopeds, if you weren't absolutely sure where you were going, because it's so confusing to people that aren't used to it. That you would be looking at the signs and not the road. But for normal type of roundabouts that are only a circular thing, and you go on and you go off, you go on and you go off, you go on and you go off, dead simple. That's all I have to say about roundabouts. What else do you want to know?
Well, I just wanted to ask something about roundabouts. We don't have many of them here. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have teeny tiny ones that are in neighborhoods. And I absolutely get the egalitarian nature and the efficiency, the highly efficient way that they should work. My question to you is, are you all pretty good about using your turn signals and letting people know what you plan to do, what turn you plan to make? Because in the little roundabouts here, nobody uses their turn signal. And so you sit there waiting when somebody's coming in, or two people are in, and they're getting off before you could get in, but they don't signal it. So you wait, and then they don't bother. So that takes away all the efficiency.
Yep. Yeah. No, I totally. The thing is also you can be indicating left because you want to take the next left turn, and then you realise, no, hang on, I didn't want that one. I want the next one. But on the bigger roundabouts, and Hyde Park Corner was possibly the most sort of not famous, but Hyde Park Corner is a massive bloody circle in the centre of London. It's huge, and people couldn't be trusted, so they retained the one-way circle of it, but threw in traffic lights to control us because we could be trusted. And in a couple of well-known squares, roundabout one-way squares then, or roundabout areas in London, they've actually closed off the sections, so it's two ways, controlled by traffic lights. You're absolutely right. It's a nightmare. It can be a nightmare for people that aren't using their indicators or are going slowly. But when it works, there's nothing like it. I would advocate them, especially as you say, in more back streets or small towns or whatever. We were talking about new towns earlier. Milton Keynes is such one new town that was built in, I believe, 1948, 49. I cannot remember for sure. it was famous for having only roundabouts.
Cumbernauld outside Glasgow is like that. It's just, and you can, if you're driving, it's just really, really difficult to work out where you are because everything looks the same because it's all been designed the same and built at the same time.
Right, I would imagine.
And another thing about roundabouts, they only work really well, and Americans are really good at this, if there are signposts at the entrance to each, on the side of every entrance to it. Otherwise, you haven't got a damn clue.
Well, I've got GPS now, and that's like what I consider my superpower, because I'm terrible with directions and absolutely terrible with left and right and all of that. Although I do use my turn signals. But I was going to say, I've seen time-lapse footage of the Magic Roundabout at night, lit up at night. And it's actually mesmerizing. And it's very beautiful to watch the cars going into and going out. But I know that I would be the one to take all of that off the rails. I'm sure I would be the car that just caused a 12-car collision.
I consider myself a confident, competent motorcyclist, but I'd be a little anxious. But at the same time, when some car drivers see a motorcyclist, they might be a little bit more cautious for us, but not all of them. When it comes down to it, you just got to do your best and hope for the best. But I still maintain my love of roundabouts.
Sure.
And far too, especially in London, far too many traffic light signals are put up at junctions when they could have put roundabout, and it's a huge thing for me.
We're starting to see more and more roundabouts in our area. And this might be something that speaks to the egalitarian nature of the roundabout. But my son always says it's all about the yield.
That's a nice way of putting it.
But don't you have to be able to gauge the speed at which people are coming, you know? I'm not real good at that. My depth perception is not very good. And sometimes I'm like, I'm going to go for it. And I start to pull out and somebody's coming a lot faster than they looked like they were coming straight on, you know? Yeah.
I'm just thinking about Colin writing that song in 1982, and he could have just called it Roundabout, but he specifically called it English Roundabouts. And I wonder whether he was making these same sort of observations that Belinda is making, and Amy and Sandra, the sort of realizing, having traveled around the world on tour, he must have observed that it was a more, or you know, they existed less in other places.
Yeah, that it's not a universal thing, is it? It's. I mean, it's interesting. We were talking about the Magic Roundabout, the famous multiple roundabout in Swindon. When we were down there for the convention and then the TC&I gigs, you know, it was obligatory, whether you needed to or not, to, like, you know, ride the rapids of the, you know, the roundabout. And it was terrifying. I was thinking, I'm gonna smash this car up here. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where to stop or where to go. So it has that sort of, it's almost like, you know, the cogs in a machine, and you get sort of propelled through it, and then pow, you're out the other end and you're headed for Stroud or something without meaning to. But it's also interesting. We were talking about Liverpool earlier on. You know, I was at the University of Liverpool, and the hall of residence I was in was actually at the end of Penny Lane. So you came out the front door and Penny Lane was there straight ahead of you. I never quite got used to it being there, but it did sort of. But it strikes me there's something like, you know, the big roundabout, the Roundabout Festival in Swindon for XTC nuts like we are is a bit like Penny Lane, isn't it? You think? I mean, I know he didn't strictly write it about that, but that's, you know, that's the association that's sort of arisen. So it's like a must do. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I can see that.
Well, let me toss this out there. I just wanted to say that, you know, the distinction of an English roundabout, I wonder if it might have something more to do with the English and how they drive. I know growing up in the South, especially growing up in the rural South, no one ever used their horn. It was considered extremely rude. Like, unless you want to save somebody's life or a deer's life or your neighbor's St. Bernard's life, you do not honk your horn. And I have memories of coming up to a four-way stop not lights, just stop signs. And in the South, in the deep South, and someone saying, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go, no, it's okay, I insist, you go. And it makes me laugh because, but I mean, I imagine in more urban environments, that's not so much a consideration, but I just wonder if the English in general are maybe more sensitive to being polite in yielding, or no. So that's just like not even on the table.
No, I'm not going to even talk for all of London here. No. But of course, in an awful lot of rural areas, of course they will, but certainly not in London. I also read
London's got its own style of driving, though, hasn't it? I think London has its own. It is a law unto itself in that sense.
It's called Go For It. I
Move
also
or get
just
out of the
read
way.
that half, and as a motorcyclist I rule, as half of all the world's roundabouts are in France. That's hard to believe, isn't it? But we're talking about standards of driving, and that can get a little boring. But that's why I like roundabouts, because they're just so fair. And you have to pay attention more.
Should we do a couple of other references? There's still quite a long list of things that we haven't mentioned, but I could just mention, because I think people would be intrigued, Ermine Street from Chalk Hills and Children. Ermine Street isn't something that everybody in the UK would know about, but it is an old Roman road. And this is something I discovered. There are two Ermine Streets. One of them is spelt with an E, E-R-M-I-N-E, Mine Street, and that goes from London right the way up to York or somewhere like that. But Ermine Street without an E is passes past Swindon. In fact, passes very, very close to where Andy grew up in Pen Hill in the northeast of Swindon, and it goes between Gloucester and Cirencester. So it's an old Roman road, making the connections, I suppose, between London and Wales. It would be part of that particular route.
Yeah, and that there you've got the secret sort of the secret identity of place going on there again, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because that road that go, and again, it reminds me of Harvest Festival and what you were saying, Peter. That sense of a long history, and this land has been populated since Roman times, and just that, and a song, Chalk Hills and Children, about being rooted rooted by children, but also rooted by the Chalk Hills. It's rooted, it's that road there. That it's very, very specific, isn't it? There's another reference which would have meant nothing to me had I not looked it up, but Aunt Sally, which appears in the wheel and the maypole. And this is curious because it's a game, it's a pub game. It's a game that's played outside in outdoor pubs and maybe fairgrounds and so on in the Oxfordshire area. It's very, very particular, Oxfordshire and neighbouring counties. And the idea is this traditional idea. Long ago, the idea would be that there would be a bust of an old woman who would be Aunt Sally or her head, and she'd be smoking a clay pipe. And the idea is that you would have to throw batons or sticks at Aunt Sally with the aim of breaking the clay pipe, and that's the game. Now the way it's done is there's a spike stuck in the ground, and a sort of, it looks like a wooden doll that's sort of put on the balanced on the top of this, and you throw your sticks to try and knock off the doll off this spike. But it goes way back to the 17th century, that one. So I've got the seed. If you've got the valley, I've got the big stick. If you've Aunt Sally's head. So that's that one. Peter wanted to say something about Bungalow.
Okay, well, all right then. A bit like we're saying about Harvest Festival, the Bungalow, the single floor dwelling.
Peter, I was watching a property program the other day, and it was calling this thing a bungalow, and actually it had 2 floors. Now, I grew up in a bungalow. I know a bungalow has 1 floor.
Yeah,
it's quite a very specific
thing. That's a defining feature, one would think.
My parents' house was, oh my goodness, it was a phrase, something bungalow, because in the loft they'd built another floor. It was a pitched roof. So they built another floor.
A mutant bungalow.
So like a sort of a hybrid.
I suppose, but I'm trying to think of the mutant bungalow, but it was something, I can't remember the name.
So the term, again, is a 19th century term. And apparently the first house to be classified as a bungalow in the UK, in England, anyway, was in 1869. And there were two of them, and they were built at Westgate-on-Sea, which is in Kent, North Kent, so a seaside resort. And for a long time, and possibly even still, they're associated with the coast or retirement to the coast, or, as I suppose we could say, downsizing or something like that, a kind of reduction in activity, not just a reduction in, climbing from one floor to the next, but it's almost like the bungalow was a kind of state of mind. There was just enough room, and it would be close to the sea or close to a beauty spot. And John Betjeman, the great English poet and poet laureate he was, actually, who, as you'll know, if you have a look at Mark's second book, What Do You Call That Noise? There's a piece in there on John Betjeman and Colin Moulding, actually, and their sort of interest in ordinary life, quote unquote, ordinary life. And that's where there's some stuff in there about bungalow. And Betjeman was unusual in that he quite liked bungalows. The term bungaloid came to be used as a pejorative for kind of like a rash of development, by the seaside or at a beauty spot that kind of spoilt it somehow. So it became like a sort of a critical term. But in specifically the XTC context, there is sort of an autobiographical one. I mean, I remember when we were at the TC and I gigs in October and November, wasn't it, of 2018. Fabulously, Colin sang Bungalow every night.
Oh, yeah.
And he prefaced it with a story about his own parents, how their dream was to retire to a bungalow near Weymouth, which is a beautiful town, actually, in Dorset, which is kind of in Hardy country, actually, just connecting up with what I was talking about earlier. Thomas Hardy's sort of invented county of Wessex was kind of Dorset plus, extra bits. And Weymouth is called Budmouth in those books, if anybody knows those books. Anyway, just down the coast from Weymouth, there was a big development of bungalows. And that was apparently, according to what Colin said at these shows, was where his parents dreamed of sort of retiring. So the idea of the bungalow became sort of charmed and associated with a life of ease and a life of rest, and the 9 to 5 is over, and all the arduous stuff about life is associated with the town and a townhouse, whereas the bungalow is associated with relaxation. I mean, you can hear that in the lyrics, can't you? Climbing rose, time to spare. Sort of a kind of benign emptiness, if you like, that it kind of represented. And the bungalow is the one-story house, as I say, isn't unique to this idea, but it has, in the English sense, it has a whole set of associations with certain types of seaside resort being occupied by people of a certain age and a certain way of life being lived within the four walls. So I think that's why it fits into this thing we're talking about of sort of particularly English way of being, which isn't necessarily obvious just from looking at the structure, just looking at the building from outside.
What you just said about the bungalows being in Westgate, I grew up in Margate, just down the road, and my parents moved to a bungalow in Westgate. It was called a chalet bungalow, which meant that there was another area upstairs. And the joke about bunging a low roof on it is pretty well known. Why is it called a bungalow? Because we bunged a low roof on it.
Okay.
I hadn't known that about those particular areas in Westgate, because they're all over the, as you say, coastal areas. And I like the idea, obviously, that older people who maybe as they get older, they won't be able to walk so fast, so they can't walk up the stairs. It does make sense, but you never want to be those types of people. Or at least I don't want to be.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because in the song, it's a dream, it's an aspiration. I mean, Colin said that his parents never actually made it; they never did that thing. But it was always that sort of dream, that sort of the far pavilions, the celestial city on the hill. That was the thing that they were working and striving and saving for. Yet somehow it was denied them in the end.
And I think part of the power of the song is that as ambitions go, it's actually very, very modest. It's a very humble ambition to have this. They're not saying I want to live in a castle or a mansion or what. They just want a bungalow, and the knowledge that they never found it, which is sort of additional to the song, but is even more poignant.
I found that really moving actually when he prefaced the song with that little story.
I thought we should talk about bungalows because property is just such a different thing from country to country, and in North America, for example, there is just so much space that I often find myself watching programs about urban deprivation in America, and all these people are sort of swanning around in vast living rooms, and I'm thinking you call that deprived? But it's because I'm not saying they're being. It's just because of my perspective. Things are much smaller in the UK than they are over there. So I thought, well, would anybody even understand what a bungalow signified?
Yeah, you've just reminded me of something actually, Mark, which isn't really. Well, I suppose it is related. When we were we had a holiday in Australia, which is just something that I had actually been looking. That was an aspiration since I was a kid. We finally got there a few years ago, and my daughter really liked. She still likes them, but she really liked them then. And an Australian band called 5 Seconds of Summer. I don't know if anybody knows their name. 5 Sauce, they also get called. Anyway, the sort of pub where they used to do their first gigs was in a suburb of Sydney, which we had to get a train out to. So she said, let's go and see it. So we went and caught the train out to the nearest station, and then she had this map, which of course she got off the internet, to find our way to this place. But what amazed me, that between the railway station and where this pub was just street after street after street of bungalows. Now I'm thinking, in Australia, you'd think, well, there's unlimited space. Why would you crowd everybody into these bungalows? But I mean, I'm guessing it's partly because although Australia is vast, there's only small bits that you can actually live in. So it was and they were all sort of 19th century, these things. So I was thinking, well, it's interesting that they've brought the architectural style with them. From the UK and from Europe, and they've sort of replicated it in the new world. So I just found that very interesting. I didn't expect that at all. I expected, like you were saying, Mark, everybody would have the outback, to set up in. Yet they were all sort of crammed in these extraordinarily sort of tight streets of bungalows.
We've got millions and millions of references that we could still get through, but I suggest that we do that some other time, because otherwise this is going to be a spin-off series in itself.
Like a Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, it's going to be a triple album at least. But I would like to hear from Amy and Sandy as our pupils in this educational exercise to see whether this has been stuff you already know, or has it been revelatory to you. Amy, maybe you could kick off.
Oh, I think there have been some very deep takes on a lot of things that I didn't know anything about. I think I've learned a lot. It's good stuff.
You've come out a better person.
I am. I'm a better person in all ways.
Sandy, as an Anglophile, how about you?
Yeah, as an Anglophile and amateur historian, I could probably talk for hours about this stuff, but I did learn some new things. So that's always interesting too. I appreciate it.
Well, we'll have to have you back. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
So I think I just will thank us now, because otherwise we will go on for several more years. But I've been fascinated by all the conversations. So thank you very much to Belinda and Peter for all the work they've put into this, because there's fantastic stuff everybody's been uncovering and really fantastic insights. We'll be back for more XTC fun. But in the meantime, thank you, Amy, Sandy, Belinda, and Peter. This has been What Do You Call That Noise? The XTC Podcast. We'll see you again. Bye.
What do you call that noise?
You can read Belinda on the subject of Dear God in the XTC Bumper Book of Fun for Boys and Girls, which is also where you'll find Peter on the subject of Ladybird. Peter also writes about the songs of Colin Moulding in What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC Discovery book. And you can get both of those books from xtclimelight.com. A massive thank you to Sarah Palmer and Lotte Fisher for providing the musical illustrations in both these episodes. And you can catch up with Sarah's band Fascine at fascine.com, and you can enjoy Lotte's artwork at instagram.com/Lotte Fisher. And Lotte is spelt Lotte. And thanks also to Lotte for providing the artwork for these 2 episodes. Thanks as well to Donna Reese for her drink recommendation. Couldn't do without that. And lots of good vibes, of course, are due to the podcast supporters on Patreon, who include the following Knights in Shining Karma: Terry Arnott, Dan Barrow, Matt Bell, Kevin Burt, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Helen Fay, Leslie Gooch, Robert Graham, Jesper Cumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Dennis LeCourrier, Liz Lynch, Marek Kraus, Ian Morris, Youssef Murrah, Amy Parkerson, Murray Meikle, Kevin Murray, Karen Neal, James Newell, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Simon Slatehome, Michael Sutcliffe, Mark Thomas, Nigel Waller, and William Wilkstrom. If you'd like to support the XTC podcast, you'd be very well advised to do so, and we're very grateful for it. And you can do so at patreon.com/Mark Fisher. I'll see you all next time.
What do you call that noise?
Head to xtclimelight.com, where you can buy my 2 XTC books. First, there's the XTC Bumper Book of Fun for Boys and Girls, which is an anthology of Limelight, the XTC fanzine I made from 1982 to 1992.
We had a couple of lifelines to the world, and Limelight was one of them.
So the book is the XTC Bumper Book of Fun for Boys and Girls. It's stunning.
Thank you, Ian Lee. And then there's What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC Discovery book, where you'll find more from the band, plus commentary from musicians, including Anton Barbeau.
For me, it's just simply a life-changing song.
Anne McHugh.
It's like a painting by Van Gogh.
Jason Faulkner.
XTC probably made the most impact on me of any band that I can think of.
Chris Butler.
If there's anything more classic XTC, this is it.
And Rick Buckler.
It was well produced as well. It had the support of a great producer. I mean, it really sounded strong.
Order your copies of both books at xtclimelight.com.
It's the paper and ink net, the internet with added staples.